everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Colours of Parenthood. I'm your host, and today we have an incredibly special guest joining us. We are thrilled to welcome Luba, a mother of two teenage boys, an award winning journalist and researcher, author, and consultant. She researches and writes about equality and social trends, and her articles have appeared in outlets such as The Guardian, Fortune, Foreign Policy, Off News Baguette, Dear Baguette Clubs, and many others. She is currently writing a book on emotional empowerment. Luba brings a wealth of experience and insights that span from the hectic world of journalism to the nuanced and rewarding journey of motherhood. In today's episode, we'll be diving into a range of topics, including balancing a demanding career with family life, navigating the complexities of raising teenage boys, and the significance of her research and writing in informing her parenting journey. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. Today we have Luba with us. Luba, could you please share a bit about yourself and your background?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Maggie. I'm really excited to be speaking on your very interesting podcast. My name is Luba Kosova. I'm a mother of two teenage boys, and I'm also a writer, journalist, and researcher. I also have my own consultancy. I live in London, and I am originally from Bulgaria, the same as you. I have traveled most of my life because my dad was an ambassador. So I've lived outside of Bulgaria more than in Bulgaria. But I spent my teenage years in Bulgaria, which was wonderful because I made really good friends, as well as my first university degree in sociology in Sofia University. So, yeah, that's it about me for now.
Wonderful. And now, if we go about your journey into motherhood, was it something that you really wanted? Was it planned?
Oh yes, I really, really wanted to be a mother for from a very young age. In fact, that's something I remember growing up and really worrying whether I would be able to have kids, and it was a fear that wasn't based on anything specific, but that was something that I really wanted, and I became a mother not so early because I was um, it was important to me to have children with love. So I only I was pregnant at 34 and I had my first child when I was 35.
And your second?
And my second kid, so my first boy is called Nestor, my second child is Alex. He was born 3 years and 9 months later, so I was 39 when I had him. So one
Okay.
would say that, I mean, for London, this is not too old
Hmm.
because women in London tend to have their children later than perhaps in the country or in other countries. But it's most certainly felt, even between my two kids, between the age of 35 and 39, I felt different and my energy was less the second time. So you really do feel the difference in having your kids, which maybe not be a popular thing to say because we have so many celebrities at the moment that have their kids in their 50s or 70s or 80s. But yeah, I did feel the the it was harder for me the older I got.
Yeah, and speaking from the perspective of living in Bulgaria, and my mom had me when she had my brother when she was 21, and I'm 24, and they talk about kids and everything. Would you say that you had this perspective being a Bulgarian yourself? Like, how old was your mom when she got you?
Well, interestingly, my mom was 35 when she had me, but I'm her
Ah,
last child. She had my sister, who's her first child, when she was 30, and that was really late. And what's really interesting is that my mom had a marriage that neither my sister nor I knew about, that they kept a secret from us, and we discovered some years ago that she had been married before, but that marriage hadn't been successful. So she then met my dad, who was her school sweetheart. They had met in first year of secondary school, and then their paths they went their different ways. So, and that's when she got together with him, and they had my sister very quickly.
Okay. And following up with the question about age, would you say that you wanted to have it earlier, or that was the perfect timing for you?
I would say that I've always wanted to have children, and I guess when I hit 30, I felt the societal pressure a lot more, even in London. And I remember um, my husband was much younger than me. And one of our first, my dad was over, and I don't remember what the occasion was. I think it was my birthday, and my first husband was 8 years younger than me. So on my birthday, my dad raised a toast, saying, basically, essentially saying, "I really want a grandchild now." And I felt such enormous pressure to at that point. But I feel like I really wanted to have kids younger, but I wasn't not going to consider having children on my own. This was not something I felt. I didn't feel I could be a good enough mother on my own, and I felt I wanted to find love and to have kids out of love, which is why I waited. And in many ways, the timing was, it just happened when it happened, because I believed that it would happen. It just happened later than perhaps I would have wanted to.
Yeah, I totally resonate with what you're saying about finding love, and this is better than having children on your own. Because, would you say it's egocentric if you decide to have kids on your own just because you want kids? Because there is this discussion going on.
I wouldn't say that, no, because it's a very, you can only judge someone if you are them. And I feel that when you have a purpose, and I empathize with having a sense of purpose. I believe that we're born not just to consume the resources of the earth, but actually to give something back. And if your
Hmm.
sense of purpose is to be a mother, and you really feel that this is what you want to do, and there is, and you don't believe perhaps that you find love, or you've not, time is ticking, then I think it's perfectly acceptable to have a child and give a child love in whatever way you can. So no, I wouldn't join that discourse, because it feels very judgmental and out of context. It's impossible to judge what's
Yep.
right and what's wrong.
Okay. And following further, now when you became a mom, what was your idea of identity, and what would you say really shifted from being a human being and now a mom as well?
That is such a good question. And the first thing that pops into my head when you ask it is that I really didn't ask myself those questions when I became a mom. And in hindsight, I should have. I should have been cognizant of who I am and what is my identity, and how it shifted. Being aware of how it shifts when you have a child. But I lost my mother when I was in my late teens, and I was very loved, and I really wanted to be a great mother, and this was so important to me that I completely lost myself in my role of mother. And I set myself up for failure, because now, from this 17 years on of being a mother, I realized that being a great mother is just impossible, because you're a human being. And when you are faced with this new situation where you completely ego depleted, you super tired, and you have this responsibility of a new child to look after, you just surviving every day is an achievement. So for me, good enough wasn't good enough. I wanted to be great, and to do that, I literally threw myself in motherhood at the expense of my own identity, at the expense of my relationship. um, and that essentially I lost myself. I became, with years going by, I became a shell of my former self. I completely, from someone who was relatively confident and larger than life, I became someone who was so unsure that I had to confer for every professional decision, or everything I did with my current, my husband now, who is also my business partner. So yes, I lost myself a good few years until that state of being lost became untenable. So to answer your question, I I really assumed the identity of a mother at the expense of all my other
Mhm.
identities, and I thought that was not the right thing to do.
Yeah, and would you say that also this affected your parenting? Because the notion of being a good mom is also being good to yourself and taking care of yourself.
100%. You've nailed it there. It did. First of all, I had completely absorbed the social conditioning that women go through, about needing to sacrifice themselves for their children. And it's very prevalent in Bulgaria and in England and around the world. So you almost, the minute you do something for yourself, you feel that guilt which you've inherited from the social conditioning that you're not giving something to your kids. And the problem with that is that at some point you really become exhausted. And I often joke that I'm a different parent in the morning than I'm in the evening, because in the morning I'm much more patient, compassionate, understanding of my children, and in the evening when I'm super tired, I become more critical, I become more judgmental. And the less you give to yourself, the more you will become that mother who is on autopilot, really, and expects so much of herself that she always feels like she's not good enough, hasn't delivered enough, and that impacts your parenting. And the second way that this impacted my parenting was that I don't want to be too hard on myself, but I was, when my first son was born and I didn't have my mum around, and my husband was French and I was Bulgarian, and we were in London, we didn't have that support system from families. I was really fearful. I was fearful of doing something wrong because I had never had a child. I had read those books, but I was so I was just frightened. I was frightened, and I remember when my kid had his first cold, he got temperature, and I guess the hormones from having given birth recently
Mm.
also impacted me in a way that I became so anxious that I almost had a meltdown. And this is something that is really, really hard to get through unless you have the support system, no matter how many books you read. And actually, perhaps we'll talk about that later, but I wasn't prepared for some of the challenges. Even though I had read books and I had gone to NCT classes, I really wasn't prepared for some of the challenges that I experienced as a parent.
Mm. Yeah, I would say that learning from all of my guests, and it just makes sense. There are not many books actually out there to teach you how to be a parent and good to yourself. It's more like what the child needs. So it's everything focused on the child, but not also keeping your sanity as a parent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know, maybe things have shifted in the last 17 years, or less, because perhaps 15. But at the time, I really I didn't realize how challenging breastfeeding was for me the first time around. And there is so much, the narrative was about things being natural, and the bond you'll experience and the
Yeah.
connection. And it was so shocking when for a month I was battling to breastfeed my kid, and it was really hard, and I found it so stressful, and breast milk was everything at the time, so I wouldn't give up because this was the best for my kid. And it's, oh my gosh, the stress I experienced, and then I shifted to expressing milk after a month and went on to do that for a year so that my kid has breast milk. And I'm pretty sure that this act of hooking up those machines to my breast 3-4 times a day, and that buzz, the dead sound of monotonous machine extracting milk from your breast, that could have been one of the first triggers of of my marriage disintegrating, because there was so much focus on things that actually, in hindsight, would he have been okay with formula milk? Yeah, he would have
Yeah.
been, actually.
Yeah, it's part of the society, and the breastfeeding is such a big topic with parents overall, because they have expectations, and when they don't meet these expectations, usually the cycle of thoughts is my body is failing, so I am failing as a mom. And it's one of my missions with this podcast, with everything I do, is basically to say that's not true. And there are many people that feel the same, so you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things you realize in hindsight, but at the time it feels exactly like you say,
Hmm.
why am I failing? This is not part of the plan. The plan was it was going to be natural, and what's happening to me? Yeah, it's quite hard. It's
Yeah.
but it's behind me now.
um Following, because you've mentioned guilt, and I read one of your blogs about guilt and parenting. Would you say more about how guilt plays role into parenting?
Yeah, unfortunately, it plays a significant role, and I think I alluded to just a bit earlier to it earlier, in the context of women being socially conditioned to give and to be caring, and to the extent that we learn to think of care as a binary thing. You either care for yourself or you care for your children, and actually, it isn't. It's the same care, but it takes a while for the narrative to shift, or for you to realize when you hit rock bottom that you have nothing left to give and you have to care for yourself. So guilt is one of the plethora of emotions that has driven me in my parenting, along love, pure love, along anxiety, guilt. There, and I have a metaphor that I've used in one of my blogs, which is, you have a veneer of calm layer, which tricks you into thinking you're calm, but underneath that there is a chaos. There is a chaos that's been um, fueled by these emotions that are conflicting, including guilt and anxiety and love and confusion. So guilt is a really pernicious one. And I learned with time, and having two boys, and having a supportive husband, that um, giving self care, or my need for self expression was, and fulfilling that need was actually good for everybody, because once I was more fulfilled and calmer, you kind of cascade this to every member of your family. And I also realized that my kids, when they were younger, they really wanted my time and wanted me to be there all the time. I remember them hanging around the window when we were going on some date night, and just being so sad that we're leaving. But that passes. And then with age, in fact, they get to a point where they really don't want to see you when they're teenagers. But with age also, I found out they're rooting for you. They want you to be happy. I at some point shifted, and my lost identity gave birth to what I actually wanted to do, which was writing. And when initially I started being published or quoted in these really reputable publications, my kids were rooting. They were happy for me. So it actually was a revelation to me that no one benefits or really expects you, certainly not in my family, to be the martyr. And the martyr is someone who does things but feels resentment. And I have done this in my life, where you do things for your kids. And in fact, there are some therapists who say that guilt is actually anger, which is reprocessed. It's anger. You feel angry about not giving enough to yourself, but when you give to yourself, you transform this anger into guilt, because guilt is an emotion that punishes you, and anger
Mm-hmm.
punishes others. So you do something for you, but you feel guilty because you feel you need to punish yourself for it. So it's a really pernicious emotion that I would love for women to go underneath the skin and try and work around. But it's something that every woman has been, it's literally part of our conditioning to feel it.
Yeah, there is such a thing as mom guilt, and everyone has experienced it more or less.
Yes.
um, I was curious to ask also because you've mentioned like losing yourself, your identity. What happened when you got your second child? You said it's 3 years later.
3 and 9 months, yeah. Almost
Yeah.
4 years.
Was there a difference, like what you expected? Were you prepared? But also, did you manage to keep this identity as a writer?
Well, actually, I must tell you that I wasn't writing then, and that's
Okay.
another that's my writing career came out of my being lost in the needs of my children, my husband, and our joint business for something like 11, 12 years. And out of that, I hit rock bottom, and I realized that I wanted to write, and I gave that career the attention that it deserved, and I haven't looked back since. But so the writing career started when my kid was 7, my second child was 7. But your question is about when he was born and how things were different. And I would say that they were very different insofar as I wasn't experiencing that high level of fear associated with the unknown, and that worry that you're going to touch your kid in a way that hurts him or do something that isn't right. That had been alleviated because I was second time mom. And I just had a conversation yesterday with my husband, and we talked about how lucky he was because it was his first biological child. Alex was his first, but my second. And we talked, and I reflected on how much calm I was, which would have been helpful for him as a father than I was with my first child. And something that I discovered in counseling that was revelatory and revolutionized my parenting, but that happened actually later, even later than when Alex was born. I realized that fear and love are actually binary feelings. When you feel fearful, you can't feel love. And when you're deep steeped into love, you can't feel fear. And this was so important for me to realize. And I realized that my enormous love for my first boy didn't come through immediately because I was so fearful of doing something wrong. And had I known the binary nature of these feelings, I would have tried to trust myself more and relax in that feeling of love for his sake. But when he was born, there was so much fear surrounding him also because he was born one of the kids who didn't cry, and nothing was wrong with him. And I never realized that you can be born and not crying, but actually everything's fine. They just needed to clear his throat or whatever. So when he was born, we went into a spasm of fear of, oh my gosh, is he
Hmm.
all right? And with Alex, there was none of that. Actually, when Alex was born, I started bleeding, and there was a lot of fretting in the delivery room around me bleeding too much. And I was super calm. I knew I was going to survive, and everyone was focusing on me. And I kept telling my husband, focus on the baby, take the baby. And it was a very different energy because that fear had subsided. And my advice to mothers is to just be cognizant of the binary nature of some feelings.
That's quite fascinating. I haven't thought about fear and love in that way, but I would suppose that it's because of the focus as well. Because if you focus on fear, if you focus of what could happen, anxiety kicks in, and you couldn't feel love as love. I connected it with peace and calm, and not only this, but just dynamic emotions, which are a bit different from fear and anxiety. So that was quite
Oh, that's
interesting to
such a
hear.
good point you're raising there. Yeah, good framing.
Thank you. And because I also read about the Fortune article about feminism, I'm quite curious to learn from you. As a mom of two boys, how do you incorporate this feminism and teach them about the challenging world that we live in?
Oh, that's such a big topic that is so alive in my family. So, yes, I'm a feminist in the broadest sense of the word, that I believe in
Hmm.
equality of all.
Yeah.
Um, and I have always been teaching my children that as well, as is my husband. We're a feminist household. But I realized something, and this is what the premise of the Fortune article was based on, that my younger boy wasn't really didn't define himself as feminist, and I noticed that whenever we started talking about the disadvantages that women experience, and the gender gaps that are so prevalent in terms of safety or power or pay or whatever, he would I could feel his resistance and rolling his eyes, and I was like, okay, what's going on there? And of course, we live in a world that there is increasing support for the likes of Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson, who are anything but feminists. So there is this societal pressure, and there is a backlash against equality. And what I realized is that more liberal parents, or the so-called progressive, more left-leaning parenting, that hasn't allowed boys to feel their feels, to feel that they can have a problem, because there's been so much focus on the inequality and how women experience it, that boys have started to feel guilty for inequality, that they shouldn't really internalize that guilt, but that most certainly happens, and they become resentful. And I think this was happening to my boy. He was like, why is there only the only focus is on girls and women, and what about me and my problems? And I'm a 13 or 12-year-old boy with my ego, and no one is worrying about me. So that really informed and shifted my parenting, in the sense that I really care to explain to my kids, and I do believe they both believe that there should be equality, that everyone should be able to express themselves. But I try to explain to them that there is, and talk to them about there. It's not a zero-sum game, which I think is what my younger kid was thinking. So if women are propped up, then men are experiencing a decline. And this is very much what's happening in our society. Whereas it's not true, actually, in countries where there is gender equality at higher levels than others, there is more men experience. Are less likely to take their own lives. They're more happy. They have more sex. They're more fulfilled. They're healthier. They're less likely to smoke. So Marianne Sieghart has written a lot about it. She's this amazing author and journalist. So I tend to talk to them about that, and also to validate that. And once you start digging, you realize how hard it is to be any gender at the moment. And when you're a teenager, it's so difficult to get through it without being mocked, ridiculed, without having to conform to the social norms that expect you to be strong and to be buff
Yeah.
and to be whatever, not to be vulnerable. So I've started to pay a lot more attention to the cues that my kids give me about their struggles and having open conversations about it. But it's a very hard space to navigate. And I think having those conversations openly and also asking questions without judging them, because I could have been like, Alex, oh my God, how can you say that and all these things? But actually, I really wanted to understand because I know Alex and my both kids are good, kind people. So I knew something wasn't quite right. So having those open conversations, I think, is the most important thing to do about this and point out that um, having making societies more gender equal is not a zero-sum game. There are no losers, there is only winners. So that's a narrative I try to kind of instill with them.
That's really beautiful. And I started thinking because you said you touched upon the topic of expressing themselves and also about being emotionally vulnerable. I started thinking about also how they teach our kids, in whichever country, and how the children are teaching themselves about what roles they have, because different families are portraying different views. And would you say that it's almost inevitable for everyone to touch upon the stereotypes because the society also talks about them, like men are the breadwinners usually, the mother is the primary caregiver usually, or that they should be rocks and women can be emotionally unstable, whereas men have to be rocks and they cannot show emotions because that's too feminine.
Oh my God, 100. The answer is 100%. No one can escape those stereotypes. And I see this in my children. The older they grow, and I don't know to what extent, I'm not a specialist on teenage development, but I most certainly see that my two boys absorbing that emotional distancing, not expressing, being more stoical. I mean, you just need to see the narratives about Ronaldo 2 days ago when he missed that penalty, the Portuguese game, and he broke down in inconsolable tears. There have been headlines about Ronaldo crying like a little girl. My sons are telling me about the memes about Ronaldo being basically memes that humiliate him on the basis of him crying. And I think that is so prevalent. There is no way anyone can be saved from that from these social norms and not hear them. And you have to be incredibly strong and very enlightened as a teenager not to absorb that and to think, oh, if I cry, I'm going to be called a little girl. As if being a little girl is an insult to begin with. You know, it's so
Yeah.
ridiculous on so many levels. But actually, when I looked at Ronaldo, I was so grateful for him showing that vulnerability. And I'm not a big fan because I find him narcissistic. But at that moment, I felt nothing but compassion for his broken dream of
Mhm.
having skills that are perpetually strong. That was what he was crying about. And I could relate to that. And I think everyone can relate to being in the sunset of something ending, or you not being as successful in something that you believed you had been. So I think we really need more role models like this. And I thought about that long and hard. And I think the role of mothers can take you so far when bringing up boys. And I can talk about boys, I don't have girls. The role of fathers is incredibly important because they model what masculinity is for their children. And the
Yeah.
children will go one of two ways: either rebel against that masculinity, go the opposite way, or in person, or identify with that masculinity. So I'm personally very grateful to my husband who does show vulnerability. He can cry when he feels sad. And I can see, and that happened recently where he had something really sad had happened to him, and he cried in front of them. And I thought that's wonderful, but they both of them went slightly rigid. They didn't know how to react because it's so contrary to the conditioning they got, that it's really difficult. But the thing I write about with passion, and I try to convey, is that until we understand that the patriarchy that we've inherited from millennia hurts not just women, but also men. It hurts men in the way that people like Ronaldo are ridiculed for expressing their pain. It hurts them in a way that they have to be too strong all the time. They can't have respite where their partner or wife takes over and says, "Do you know what, I'll work for a couple of years. You go and do your retreat or whatever it is you're going to be doing." They don't have that. They have to keep this bravado. That's also patriarchy. That hurts them as much as it hurts women to be sexually violated, and uh, uh, and of course women, I don't want to minimize that women are by far the biggest victims, in the sense that there is an epidemic of gender-based violence, which
Yeah.
90% of which comes from men. Women are less well paid. A fraction of them have positions in power. I'm not trying to negate that, but I don't want to neglect the fact that this burden of the patriarchy, the breadwinner that you mentioned, that also falls on men, and it
Yeah.
leads to them being much less adaptable, which is why middle-aged men are the group that is most likely to take their own lives. Why? Because by the time they got to their middle age, they are broken. They can't sustain that bravado anymore. They just can't keep going. And I really want to teach my boys to seek connection with communities around them, which women are much better at doing, at really not conforming to the stereotypes. I don't know how successful I am, to be honest, but at least I'm trying.
I think this is like the best thing to do, and the first step to everything is to do it and to be. I imagine that I, as a parent, I have to be really patient with showing what I want, like what I want them to believe in, like my future children. And that really made me think when you said about Ronaldo and everything. What happens in classrooms with children that, for instance, a boy experiences something really sad, but it's really scared that he could cry in front of everyone, so he could go to the toilet, whereas girls would probably just hug each other and be like, "I'm so sorry you're crying, everything will be fine." At least that's how I remember when I was little, that I wasn't really scared to cry. It was just a normal thing that we do when something bad happens, even if I had a bad grade. Yeah, people sometime after would be like, "Maggie, how could you cry about a grade?" But overall, when I was crying, people would be only supportive. Whereas, even though we're human beings and everyone, if a boy does that, it would be more like just making fun of them.
Absolutely, and that negates the part of the humanity of any human being. Experiencing emotions, which is our body's reaction to a thought, to an event, and crying is one of them,
Yeah.
is the most natural thing to do. But boys are taught that that makes them lesser than, that this makes them inadequate. So they deny part of their humanity. And actually, I'm at the moment writing a book about emotional empowerment. And what I find is that we think women are much better at expressing their emotions and feeling and understanding their emotions. But what I'm finding is that not to be the case. And when I analyze why, I think it's because women are taught to really decode other people's emotions very well. They sense them better than perhaps men do, but they're not used to looking inward and thinking, oh, what am I feeling? So when it comes
Yeah.
to their own emotions, sometimes women are know better than men. But I hear your point around crying. At least we're allowed to express sadness, whereas men are not, and they therefore uh, that sadness metastasizes in anger, because anger is allowed to be experienced by men.
Yeah. And now from a different angle, I wanted to ask you what it's. I'm really curious to see what's your point in bringing children in the UK. And based on that, you've grown up in Bulgaria as a teenager, as you said, because it's quite different. Like I lived in the UK. My cousin is from the UK, and I see such a difference of how they bring up the children, even in kindergarten, whereas in Bulgaria. And how did that affect your parenting style, also?
This is such an interesting question. I I find it very hard to self-analyze and to reflect on this, partly because as I said, I grew up in different countries. So I've grown up in Asia, in Africa, in Europe, in Bulgaria, which is part of Europe, of course. And I learned from a young age that home for me is where my family is. And this is very much how I bring my children up. So my family consists of three races, four nationalities, and heritage from two continents. So we're a melting pot of cultures and colors, and that is wonderful. It also comes with its own challenges where we're finding hard to understand some elements of each other. And therefore, what is really important to me as a parent is to anchor the bringing of up of my children in universalist values. I teach them, as I have learned myself, to look for the humanity in a person before you label them as a nationality, as
Mm.
a gender, as a sexuality or whatnot. And that serves me really well, and I hope one day it will serve them well. But if I think in terms of I most certainly have some traits from being Bulgarian that my kids either ridicule, make fun of, or just find amusing. One of them is that I am very tactile and very emotional in my parenting style, and sometimes they find that to be over the top. And I've learned, because I worry not to enmesh them, so I've learned to watch their cues, and if they show slightest bit of irritation, I back off. So that's one. Like every Bulgarian mother, I love through feeding my kids is super important, so much so that I still make, and I do, perhaps not perhaps, I most certainly do too much for my kids in that sense. I still do the breakfast for my 13-year-old, and occasionally on the weekend for everybody, because I've told that you express your love through feeding. And that's something I really, even though I know that actually that's not perhaps the best thing to try to do, I still can't help it by doing that. And the other thing is doing a bit too much for your kids, which
Yeah.
I now know that from books like Michelle Obama's a second book, the title escapes me, where she explains that part of she reveres at her mother's upbringing of her and her brother, because she helped them be independent from a very young age. From the age of 5, they were waking up by themselves, they were doing their beds, and she felt that this gave her the confidence to function as an adult much more, confidently. And I realized that this is exactly what I should be doing as a mother, and my Bulgarian or Balkan roots have made me think that, oh, doing things for your kids is really a way to express your love. And now I'm trying to reframe it and to say, actually, by doing too much for your kids, you make them dependent on you. And that's more, you do this for your own ego, not so much for your kids, because what your kids need to have is confidence that they can do things for themselves. And I try now, and they can cook and do various things. because I feel, okay, I actually don't want to set them up for stress once they're on their own in the world. So that's been something that's been really interesting to see from the perspective of Bulgarian and Balkan mentality versus perhaps a more Western approach. But I'd love to know what you said, that your cousin, the way they're bringing their kids up is so different than basically Bulgarian and English way of bringing kids up. How would you define it?
I would touch upon what you said already because I see also a difference in our kindergarten in Bulgaria that they're really, really protective of the kids, whereas in the UK I see that my aunt is always surprised, like it's raining so much, it's cold, they're gonna play football or basketball outside. Here they would never. I mean, I'm talking about 9-year-old, 8-year-old, or 10-year-old, whereas here they will be really protective, and the parents will be actually really mad if they learn that, oh, they put my kids on the field when it was raining, whereas in the UK it's quite common. And what you said definitely about going out of your home, being more independent, here there are still many boys living with their moms when they're 24, 25, which is quite a different experience when you go out Bulgaria. That's what I mean. And I see that my mom is also like really clingy to the kids. And she does not do actually a favor to my brother, but she learned that quite late. Like now he's on his own, but he's not really prepared to be on his own because she let him out of the house really late.
Yeah, and there is an economic argument for this. Sometimes kids can't afford to live on their own in Bulgaria, and increasingly so actually in Britain as well. But that's definitely an area for me to work on, helping my kids be more independent. And I really want to,
Yeah.
because I want them to be happy ultimately, rather than indulge my ego in thinking, aren't I a good mother? I've done everything for my
Hmm.
kid today. But it made me laugh when you said the football thing, because this is one of the conversations. For years, I couldn't understand how there is this super cold weather and my kids are going out in their kits, and I'm like, oh my god, they'll be ill. And my husband is laughing at me. He's like, this is Britain, this is what we do, what are you fretting about? So yeah, it took me a long time to accept the fact that they were going to play football come rain or shine, except if it's hail, perhaps is the only way that would stop it, but nothing else.
Yeah. And as our time is coming to the end, I wanted to ask you one last question. And that would be, knowing what you know today, what would you say your younger self about how to approach parenting? And would you give any sort of advice to a younger mom that is in the same feeling fearfulness, has not been prepared?
Oh, yes, I'm afraid I may repeat some of the things I said earlier, but the most, I guess, transformational thing that I learned was the binary nature of fear and love, and to try and connect with your love, so that the fear will subside. To trust. I would have said to myself, just trust yourself more and don't expect to be a great mother, because that is a myth. Good enough mother is good enough for you. So that would have been another thing. Trust yourself. Experience. Also, uh, expect that there will be challenges, that being a mother is not this romantic notion that, oh, you'll just know what to do because your kid came out of you. Not at all, actually. It carries so many challenges. There will be times when you will not know what to do, and that's okay. And whilst I would bury my head in books, and I regret some of the books I read, I would I would say to my younger self, just trust your instinct a bit more. If you're really flustered, sit down, maybe meditate for 10 minutes and go back to that problem and see how it feels. Um, and I would most certainly um, advise my younger self to work around, to navigate guilt, not to succumb to it to the degree where you feel so lost that you don't know who you are anymore. But I would encourage, do those classes, do that pottery class, do that writing class, go and meet your girlfriends, go to for a run. These are all great things, and they will make you a better mother. And secondly, they will help you stay grounded in your own identity, which is so important. And ultimately, what your kids will want, they will want to know who you are as a person as much as they want to love you as their mom.
Thank you, Luba. That was beautiful. I really appreciate what you shared and all those insights that made me think, and I will think about after this as well. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm so grateful that you aired my opinions, and I just loved our discussion. I don't dwell enough on being a mother and on parenting, and you've given me that gift, and I'm very grateful.